Hello, everyone. Thank you once again for tuning into the N1 podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, and today we're here to talk about the new political order emerging in the United States. So, sometime last week or a few days ago, the Democratic Party, the institution of the Democrats, released the autopsy report for the 2024 election, basically outlining their information that they had and why they believe they lost the 2024 election. Now, I will do a larger video about this in the future. Probably throughout the remainder of this week, I'll spend actually reading the 192-page report that they came out with. But I did a quick Control F function. If you don't know Control F, you can just type in a word and it'll see if the entire document, how many times that word is in there. So I looked up the words genocide, Gaza, and Israel. And as you can see, they're listed 0 times. Many people online that have already read the report are commenting on it and saying it's pretty out of touch. Yes, that's kind of the consensus that I can share so far with my skimming and the conclusion that I kind of came to. As you can see, their conclusion is this. They have no conclusion. They literally did not put a conclusion. They put a spot for it, and then somebody who came along and fact-checked and annotated said there is no conclusion. So yeah, pretty out of touch in my opinion. So why do I bring this up to you guys today? Well, that kind of inspired me to make a video about the newer emerging political order in the United States. And so I want to define a couple terms that maybe people have a loose understanding of today so that we can have a better conversation in the future. So first and foremost, I would like to help you guys understand the difference between the factions within the parties, the Republicans, the Democrats. They're not all so aligned as people possibly in the media would have you feel. So with that in mind, I want to give the textbook definition, or at least what I came up with for definition. You guys can let me know how wrong I am, but I work pretty hard to get these definitions of what a liberal, a progressive, and an institutional Democrat are and how they differ, and then what a MAGA Republican and a constitutional conservative and how they differ, because those are the largest factions of the Republican Party, and then liberals and progressives are the main proponents of the Democratic institution. So I thought it'd be interesting just to give you guys a definition. So for a liberal, that is somebody who believes in liberty, individual rights, democracy, equality, and advocates for government action to promote social change. Pretty standard. A lot of people could say that social change is something that anybody can do, not just the government, but ideologically, liberals, that's what they believe in. They, for the most part, believe that the government is responsible for pushing societal changes. I can agree with some of that as well. You guys will probably understand at the end of this video why necessarily I can agree with some of the liberal spots and some of the conservative spots as well. But and then we have a progressive who is a little bit further aligned, I should say this first. A liberal is a center-left ideology. So if you're looking on this line here, boom, there's our line. Look at it. It's a great, nice straight line. So this is basically the left and right for ideologies. On the right side, you have Republicans. And on the left side, you have what people say are Democrats, or the leftist institutions, contrary to the right side institutions, right? And when I use the word right, I only mean directionally right or ideologically right. I don't actually mean the word correct. So let me just make that distinction for you guys. So the liberals are one thing; they're more center left, and then the progressives are more far left, or the left of far left, so middle left, far left. And a progressive is somebody who is critical of capitalism, and they advocate for government action for societal changes again, but they want increased support for social programs, advocate for government economic intervention, and they want protections of marginalized groups. So they go a little farther than liberals. Some people, that's just the definition. I'm sure there's plenty of people that self-identify as liberal that do have the same morality or the same ideological code, we'll say, than people that are progressive. This is just the main constituents of the political party, which is the Democrats. But these two groups differ a little bit from what we can define as an institutional Democrat, which is much, much, much different than these two groups so far. These are people that are more pro-establishment, that like the status quo. I have for an institutional Democrat, it's a party worker, works within the government norms, oppose radical shifts in policy, and have a practical approach to politics. These are elected officials, party staffs, donors, consultants. This is what we regard as the left. Donald Trump says the left. These are the people he's basically talking about. He just means the Democrats or people that are not on his political party. So if you disagree with Donald Trump and he's called you a leftist, this is necessarily why, because if we look at the line again, boom, he's referring to this group of people on the left. All right, now that we have that out of the way, why is this something that we should notice, or that I should bring note to? Because the institutional Democrats have a lot of power, obviously, within their party, but progressives and liberals don't necessarily feel like that is the way that the party should be going. They have differences between their same group, but there's the largest difference between liberals, progressives, and institutional Democrats. So it's kind of an anti-establishment versus a pro-establishment ideology for that political party. So there's a little bit of contrast in there. There's a little bit of conflict in the Democratic Party. They're not as successful on policy because they don't all align as well. That word is called cohesion. In a political party, when policies are all kind of agreed on and it's easier to work together as a political party, that means you have a higher cohesion. And the Republican Party overall and historically has a higher cohesion, or it's more cohesive than the Democrat Party. So the Republicans, once they get into power, they will likely all vote for the same things, even if there's differences between the groups that are part of that party. But the Democrats, they're not necessarily the same way. This is demonstrated very clearly in some of the policies with Donald Trump and some of the policies with Joe Biden. Under Joe Biden, he had a control, I believe, of the House and the Senate. Or maybe it was one. I can't say exactly. I might just split halfway through. This is not what's important. What I do mean to make the point of is Donald Trump has a firmer grip over the people in his party that they will likely vote for what he says or what he agrees with versus what Joe Biden had with the Democrats. Other Democratic presidents or other Republican presidents had their own stature when it came to being the figurehead for the party, but I could definitely say, and this isn't like something to even debate. This is just historical fact at this point, that the Republican Party has a higher cohesion and there's a stronger likelihood of working together in the Republican Party for Republicans than there is for the Democratic Party. Until recently, let me say this, until recently. That is basically the reason we're making this entire video today, is that I've brought some terms to you guys today, and I want to outline one more important thing that's really going to break all this open before we go into page 2. I even got 2 pages today. I know it's a serious deal. So anyway, so higher cohesion in the Republican Party, except for recently. So overall higher cohesion, they agree with some things. Those are like Second Amendment rights, immigration policies, or nationalism. People on the right, or people that are Republican or conservative, people that just consider themselves to be more on the right side of politics. Look at the line again. Boom. This is the right. This is what I'm talking about. Republicans. Republicanism. A big R republicanism. This is the party. Anyway. So many people consider themselves to be conservatives, or I guess you could say a Trumpist. Is that necessarily the word? Or just a Republican? And that means that you are ideologically part of the right side of U.S. politics. That's all it means. That is it. You can make any other assertion what somebody could possibly believe in or stand for based on what their policies or what politics they agree with already, but we're not going to do that today. I just want to note that, like I said, there's higher cohesion, and those are the things that Republicans or people on the right stand for. However, the cracks are forming. Let me define for you the most prevalent group in the Republican Party today, which is the MAGA Republicans. It is a new kind of term that's kind of only came around since, obviously, Donald Trump started the Make America Great Again movement back in 2015, 2016, which is the Republicans who are no longer part of what we used to be, which was kind of like we'll get into that in a second, but it was more pro-establishment, pro-social norms, kind of like traditional status quo, and now it's more radical changes and populist policy. So it's much more different now. So a MAGA Republican, like I said, is a populist, anti-establishment, nationalist, far-right conservative centered solely on Donald Trump. So Donald Trump says something, that is what a MAGA Republican will then shift their policies to surround. So if Donald Trump decides that he has a certain policy that was different from 10 days ago, his supporters will likely change their minds to fit the new metric for whatever Donald Trump decides. Often skeptical of institutions, and they seek radical solutions in policy. We're not going to get too far into that. Again, that's not the focus of today's episode. So in contrary to that, the second part of kind of the Republican institution is the constitutional conservative. So if you can think of a constitutional conservative, that's going to be somebody who is more, I'll just give you a definition. They're a traditionalist, small government, and individual liberties focused. They believe in strict interpretations of the Constitution and have strict economic policies as well. That is a constitutional conservative. Less pro establishment, I would say more cautious on policy, and definitely less radical when it comes to applications or any type of policy just in their politics to begin with. Constitutional conservatives are what many people say the backbone of constitutionality in the United States, of our republic. The fact alone that so many people want to change or edit or do away with certain things in the Constitution, and the Constitution has not changed over the course of 250 years, and it has, obviously. It's changed drastically, but it hasn't changed drastically in very important ways as well. And many people attribute that to the stringency of the constitutional conservatives. So people that want small government, people that want less intervention in our economies. So these are what our constitutional conservatives. I believe now they're the smaller party, or the smaller faction of the Republican Party. So now let's talk about somebody you might have heard of before. He's been in the news more recently since he lost his congressional race. That is Thomas Massie of the 4th Congressional District for Kentucky. He lost his race after Donald Trump actually endorsed his opponent and AIPAC as well. And he basically attributes his loss to being because Donald Trump kind of doesn't want his his ideology to be part of the Republican Party, and also because we'll get into a couple reasons. Mostly, I will say this. Thomas Massie is known as Mr. No in Congress because he votes against expanding the federal government, he votes against advancing federal spending, and he votes against surveillance measures. That's my guy right there, all right? If you guys, I'm not going to try to place too much of my own personal policies into this. I kind of just want to educate you guys on this. And kind of come to your own conclusion. You guys can let me know. But personally, I am somebody who understands, and I made a video about this as well, the danger, the threat that is carelessly borrowing or adding to the national debt. And the fact that we had somebody in Congress, he's still in Congress now until the end of the year, until the beginning of next year, who basically was as adamant as he was to not add more spending, to not add more power to the federal government, and to not allow for increased surveillance measures of everyday Americans. So, as I just said, Thomas Massie was defeated because Donald Trump and AIPAC had endorsed the candidate that was running against him. So, what did Thomas Massie decide to do? Well, there's a thing that you can do if you're getting campaign money. Basically, if you're running for a campaign, you have to file with the FCC that says that, hey, I'm not running anymore. Any of the money that I'm getting is not for re-election or whatever. You basically can't accept donations anymore. He, however, filed paperwork to continue to run for a new federal office. If you're a congressman, what is another federal office that you could run for? He's probably going to try to run for president. I would say there's a very high likelihood that he's going to try to run for president. And maybe we'll do another video strictly just on Thomas Massie, and I'll mention a little bit later on why I think he could possibly do some things that I'd like to see. But that's very interesting. So that kind of becomes the question is what happens next? And I'll ask you guys that. I want to know what you think. Leave a comment below. What exactly do you think happens next in 2028 or exactly tomorrow, let's say, with what Thomas Massie is hoping to achieve? I think it'd be very interesting to see him try to run against basically a new institution. And the problem with that, however, and like I've kind of mentioned before of why the progressives and liberals are one way and institutional Democrats are another, and how constitutional conservatives are one way and MAGA Republicans are another, is because the cracks are indeed forming. In a good way, in a very important way. For somebody like me that has a despicable attitude towards the two-party system and the institutions that basically control our political atmosphere, unfortunately, through whatever other subversion tactics, control tactics, or just straight lying tactics. Obviously, I don't like that. And so if these two groups can kind of understand, wait a second, these institutions have gotten so big, they've gotten so close-minded, and they're not in touch with their people anymore. Are they even still what we should be holding up? Possibly not. But again, that's for you guys to decide. So I have a question for the audience. Like I've said, if you guys want to comment below, what do you want to have happen next? I'll say what I'd like to see happen, but there's really only three things that could happen from this. So the three main routes, that's our next point here. One, obviously, is a party split. We can have one or both parties split, and then we can go from having two political parties to three or four, which is the Democrats and Republicans still exist, but there's more a moderate party or like a sub-least version of the Democrats or Republicans that are just a little bit different in ideology. We could have a party collapse and then it's refounded, which has happened before. We could see, for instance, let's say the Democratic institution, everybody just kind of stopped voting for those people, but then all the same people that were already part of that institution then kind of create something new, and it's similar to what it was before, and a lot of the same people are still working for it. That would basically be, and that could happen to one or both parties as well. Or, and this is the kind of one I'm hoping for, which would be interesting, is that there's a party split and a party merger. So let me put it this way. The liberals, who are center-left, and the conservatives, or the constitutional conservatives, which are center-right, actually align pretty well, very closely, in a way that I think only because of the political atmosphere we've been in for so long, that they have not been connected on purpose. So I'm going to do the dirty work, or at least I have already, so I could just tell you the 6 things that I found that they very closely align on, and you guys can tell me what you guys think is the likelihood that a party split and a party merger would happen. We'll see, but for liberals and conservatives, they fundamentally agree on these 6 categories, which is individual freedoms, which is expanding of human rights protections, which is less institutional power, which is more efficient government, another is less money in politics, and finally is better representation for the general American populace. Those are the 6 things that liberals, who are possibly Democrats or on the left, and constitutional conservatives that are possibly Republicans and on the right, fundamentally agree with. So if those 6 things somehow seem like, well, I don't feel like my party's really doing it for me these days on these 6 categories, I'm sure there's a lot of people that feel the same way, but just maybe don't seem exactly like the people you're used to speaking to about this. So my final conclusion for you guys today is this. The cracks, as I said, are indeed forming. Follow Thomas Massey closely, very closely. I believe he's the most likely to act as the catalyst to all of this, truly. If he, which it seems like he will, if he tries to run in 2028, he might run either as an independent or as a new proclamation of a constitutional conservative party. And that could be really cool. I feel and I think it would be incredibly healthy for this country. Incredibly healthy. So lastly, I'll leave you with this. Be open to accepting differences, as big changes are coming, and it's good to have friends. So that's really all I'd like to say for you guys today. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. Not a very incredibly in-depth video today. I just had some information that I wanted to share, define some things for you guys, and hear what you guys had to say. So definitely give me some feedback. I very much look forward to engaging with you guys in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, as always, for today, guys. I appreciate your viewership, as always. Adios, mis muchachos, and until next time, a peace out.